go. All right. So welcome to Auntie Sue's Pandemic Kitchen. And this week we're talking about bone broths and sacred contracts. So probably your first question is, what's a sacred contract? But it might be, what's a bone broth? Could be either way. But at any rate, and then what do they have to do with each other? So when we talk about bone broths and bones, they have the same energetic frequency. In traditional Chinese medicine, they have the same frequency as water energy. So we've got bones in water. That's really strong water energy. And the other thing that might be kind of curious if you think about it, or if you were reading through the list of how we're doing things. So last week we talked about sprouts, which is a living food. It's a food that's alive. And next week we're going to be talking about making yogurt, which is also a living food, which is also full of life. But bone broth is, bones arguably are definitely not a living food. And if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, they might not even be an acceptable food at all. But I want to talk about that. I want to talk about eating and death, and certainly the bones are a reminder of that, and how difficult we all have with confronting death, and particularly right now at this time. So what are we afraid of? Oftentimes we're afraid of death. And this is something that's a particular issue right now at this time. So why do we fear death? Do we fear the pain? Do we fear watching, leaving loved ones, watching other loved ones struggle with it? There's so many different things that we fear around death. And if anybody wants to jump in here and talk about something, feel free to wave your hand. So we all have these fears about death. And one of the fears that we have is not having enough time and losing time and leaving before it's our time. So we think about leaving before it's our time. Why is that an issue? There's so many traditions, spiritual traditions, that talk about the day of our birth and the moment of our birth and the moment of our death does not belong to us. It's not in our control. Those are in control of a power higher than us. So those are our destiny, if you will. And we are born. I've heard physicians actually talk about it as being genetically encoded in our DNA, which is also associated, by the way, with water energies. So those moments are not ours. Those come with us from beyond. But what we have come here with and what we have in our control is our health and what we do with the precious life that we have. And that's the sacred contract. And when people talk about a sacred contract, they talk about before we're born, we make agreements with everyone and everything that we will be doing in our life and what we want to get done. And sometimes if you've ever been a teacher, you know that it's much harder to be a teacher than it is to be a student. And so the teaching portion of our sacred contract is always going to involve a lot more challenge than the learning part. But learning is also part of it. And Carol Admays, who refers to this as Earth School, she has a wonderful saying about this sacred contract. When we ask, it's also, what is our life purpose? And most of us don't really want to ask what our life purpose is, because if we ask our life purpose and we're really sincere about it, things in our life will start to change immediately and change very fast. And one of the things that she says is that your guardian angel will immediately ask you these questions. They will confront you with the difficult questions. They'll say, your job, it's not doing anything for you. It's not helping you with your purpose. So how should we handle this? Do you want to quit, or shall I have you fired? And your relationship, this is also something you need to work on. So what, how would you like me to handle that as well? So we have these questions, and most of us oftentimes when we are challenged with these kinds of things, we tend to sort of numb out a little bit. Well, we decide we'd rather take the comfortable route because comfort is nice. This is what we share in common with dogs. We like our comforts. This is why we get along so well with our dogs, I think, because we like comfort. But all of these traditions also have some variation on the notion that there are no accidents and that everything happens for a reason. And the reason is always good, and we have to find the good. But when we talk about finding the good, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be for our comfort and our it's not necessarily a complete joyride. And in fact, what is good for us may not be good for someone else, and what is good for someone else may not be good for us. Well, our good may in fact be causing hell on earth to all sorts of beings, but we have to take that time to step back and say, what's the good, the greater good? How are we involved in this? And generally speaking, when it's a teaching contract, those are the ones that are going to be the ones that are most difficult to get to. But that being able to take that time and being able to ask that question and deal with that kind of difficult issue is one of the ways that we get solace when we are feeling suffering. We do feel like, the world has kicked us in the butt or the teeth or wherever it is we've been kicked at the moment. And this certainly is true of this time. And it's very easy to look just at what is going wrong now. And taking the time to step back and say, what's the good in this, both for us personally and for the world at large. And then when you have faith in a conscious universe, then you know that the virus is not an accident either, and that we need to take this time. And we've been talking about this in the Pandemic Kitchen for a number of weeks. So the thing about eating that makes it really hard is that in order for us to survive, in order for us to live, everything that we eat involves the sacrifice of life for what have eaten. So we may tell ourselves that plants are not alive, but indeed they are alive, and we know now that they can communicate with each other. Bacteria are alive, and many of us actually are eating, when we're eating mushrooms and fungus, we're eating from fungi, but we also eat bacteria, and we'll be doing that next week with our yogurt. That's where a lot of the nourishment in yogurt comes from. So all of these are beings that are alive, and somewhere along the way we have to come to terms with that. And it's difficult for us in the modern world because we have been so sanitized and so separated from death in many respects, and now we really have to confront it. And a lot of us choose to eat processed foods because they don't appear to be alive. They're so removed from life itself that we can tell ourselves that nothing died. But indeed, with processed foods, far more things have probably died just in the transport of the materials and the packaging and all the other things that go into that. So the closer we can get to living food, the better it is. And bone broth brings us in touch with that on a spiritual level, as well as being a fabulous nutrient. It is a wonderful food. And Master Lu, who I study with, he always says the food is innocent, but bone broth is what we eat is innocent, but the bone broth is something that has been a part of what people do. Indigenous people were much more tuned in to the fact that they were taking a life and giving thanks for that life. And whatever we're eating, if we can stand for that moment before we start eating, or that moment when we finished eating, if we can stand in the light of grace and say to ourselves, thank you for all the lives that brought that food to us. Because many, many lives, the apple that you have on your shelf or in your refrigerator that you eat, if you think of how far it traveled and how many First of all, it was alive on a tree. It took, you know, a year for it to develop, almost a year for it to develop, and then it travels and people handled it. And that apple that you brought home is your apple. It is your apple. And that indeed is that, you know, connecting to our food. Even a century ago, many of us learned from parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, waste not, want not. It was a Ben Franklin phrase, but waste not, want not. And bone broth is certainly a piece of that. When you're connected to the lives of the beings that bring you life, waste not, want not is a sacred duty as well. And those bones would sit on the back of the wood stove. And they weren't wasted, and by the time they get cooked, they're usually kind of mushy, and you can feed them to the dog. I fed the bones from my broth that I made this week to Lulu, and she loves them. We have to be careful not to feed her too much because they're a very rich food. But waste not, want not. That is the key. And if you can put them in the compost, that's fine. If you can feed them to your animal, that's fine. If you can, even, you know, when they go into landfill, it still is, you know, that's the saddest way for us to let go of that. But it is, you know, the cycle of life, and being connected to that cycle of life and understanding that with our food. And I think the bone broth brings us that as well. Part of horror, I think, for us in modern life, and part of the reason we often, people, deal with the difficulties of modern life in many different ways with their food, and people make lots of rules about their food, and it's always about some sort of purity kind of thing. But all of our food comes to us through fossil fuels. It travels by boat, it travels by plane, it travels by car, it travels by train. It all comes to us that way. And it all involves the labor of people who are often, illegal immigrants, other people often underpaid, underserved, all the the important workers, I'm blanking on the name, but the workers of necessity. All of those necessary workers are people, many of them are people who bring us food in various ways, and they can't stop working. And that, we all, if we think about it for any length of time, we realize that that is true. The packaging that our food comes in, the packaging that we take it home from the store, all of that serves a plastics industry that is choking the life out of every continent and ocean on the planet. These are all things that when we, go to the grocery store, we have to deal with. All of our vegetables, by the way, all of our vegetables are actually fertilized with munitions, with, the products of war. And that's why Timothy McVeigh was able to blow up the Oklahoma, the building in Oklahoma, the federal building in Oklahoma City with a trailer, with a truckload of fertilizer, because fertilizer was munition. It was always munition, and it was a bright idea of one of the the munitions barons that they could use this as fertilizer, and it was certainly encouraged, if not outright forced on farmers, and it has been the detriment of not only the land but the incomes of farming people ever since, because before they didn't have to pay for the fertilizer was free. They got it from the animals that they kept on their farms, and it enriched the soil. So there's been this huge, whenever we go to the store, whenever we buy food, there's always this piece of it, this sort of the dark underbelly of food in our current life. But we have to eat, we have to sleep, and we have to work. And these are all things that we have to do. And most of this stuff is not in our control. We can make small controls, which is why we say, okay, I'm not going to eat this, or I'm not going to eat that, or I'm going to buy from here but not from there. These are all and can be very important things, that choices that we make, but ultimately the control is not in our, directly in our hands, it's indirectly. And so how do we make peace with this fact that we do have to eat and we do have to sleep, we do have to work. We also have to play and we have to love. And those are part of our sacred contract, because when we come here with a sacred contract, it's never about bad things. It's always about the good, finding the good. And we come here to love when we come here to celebrate life. And those are the two things that we need to do. And those are part of our sacred contract. And so one of the things I would urge you to do, if you decide to go in and make a bone broth, which is extremely nutritious and also a wonderful way to add flavor to gravies and vegetables and other kinds of things, and extra nutrition to all those things, is to take a minute to sort of sit back and contemplate what it is that you dreamed about doing with your life when you were a child. A lot of times when I evaluate kids, I will always ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's interesting because the younger ones are much clearer about what they want to do when they grow up. The older they get, the less clear they get about it, because now people have told them, oh no, you can't do this, or oh no, you can't do that. And actually, Ellen DeGeneres is where I first got the idea of doing this, because I saw her do live comedy in Tucson once, and there was a little girl about 13 who had come, her mom had taken her, or her parents had taken her to the Ellen's comedy show, and Ellen said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then she said, I'm always looking for some job possibilities myself, like maybe a fireman or police officer, those kinds of things, maybe comedy's not where I want to be. But I ask kids that, and I think it's always important to do that, especially when we get stuck as adults, like to try to remember when we were 5 or 6, and what is it that we really dreamed about doing with our life? And then we need to ask ourselves, how have we done that? That's part of our sacred contract, because when you're a little kid, you can still remember what that contract was. As you get older and people, the water gets muddier and muddier, and you have a harder time seeing what that is. So take a minute while you're, the bone broth actually is going to go for 12 to 24 hours. So you have a lot of minutes actually in there where you can sit back and contemplate what it is you want, what it is that you think your purpose might be. Let's see. So does anybody have any questions? All right, I think it's time for me to give you the recipe for the bone broth, and I'm going to try once again. I had such a miserable experience with screen sharing the first pandemic kitchen. I haven't not dared to do it again, but I think I have it set up this time. I'm going to show you the stages of the bone broth. So here we go. Let's see. No, it didn't come on. Yes, it did come on. Yes, there it is. Okay, there we go. All right, so these are the bones that I started with. And one of the things I do oftentimes is save bones. If I get a roast, I always try to get a roast with bones in it so that I can use those. I may buy soup bones at the store. In this case, I bought some chicken feet, and I don't know if you can see that from this picture because everything's all frozen at this point. But that is what you're looking at, is a bunch of frozen chicken feet. I have never actually done a bone broth with chicken feet, but I've heard it's really, really good. It's full of gelatin. So if you have any kind of joint problems, because water frequencies also resonate with our bones and joints. So if you have joint issues, bone broths are really, really good for that. And chicken bones and chicken feet are even better. And of course, the foot is also the part of the body that resonates most with water energies as well. So in Chinese medicine. So that is the, let's see, is it gonna let me go to the next slide? No, that's a different one. All right. Let me go back to the Zoom and go back to the, Okay, let's see. Let me stop screen sharing, see if I can find the right screen that I picked that had all the pictures in it. Let's try this one. All right. Share. All right, let's try this. There's the frozen bones. Yay, now I have my arrow. Okay, so then I put them in a crock pot. So you take the frozen bones, I actually boiled mine just because I boiled it in a pan on the stove because they were frozen, and I don't like to put frozen stuff in the crock pot because I don't think it gets hot enough, fast enough. So I stuck it in the crock pot, and you can sort of see things in there. This is at the end of 24 hours of cooking. So I put it in there with water, plenty of water to cover it up. You want to have a couple of inches of water over top oftentimes because some of that water is going to boil off. I added maybe a tablespoon or more of salt. You want it to be a little bit salty. Our broth should be salty whenever you buy those little broth cubes. They're full of salt. And salt is the other thing that resonates with water frequencies. So you add the salt and then vinegar, and the vinegar is the acid, and that's going to help to transform those bones and really leach out all the minerals that are in the bones. So between the salt and the vinegar, and the water, you're really going to start dissolving those bones, and all of the calcium and magnesium and potassium, all the vitamins, all of the glucosamine and chondroitin, all of that stuff goes into solution in the bone broth. It looks pretty nasty here, I have to say. And this is then after 24 hours, I get my slotted spoon and I pull everything out, and they look really gross here. Again, this is like bone broth gets you in touch with yuckiness of life, as well as the joy and the beauty. And this is my final product here. I've taken all the solids out. I've poured what was left of the liquid through a strainer. And so all of that's taken out, and I have this wonderful broth. And this fat on top, ordinarily, I would take the fat on top and use it to cook with. But in one of my recipe books, I read that when you use chicken feet, that fat on top is not going to work well for cooking. And I am expecting, because it is chicken feet, that this will actually be more of a gelatin when I get done with it. Of course, as soon as you put it on the stove, you can melt it. And it's wonderful to add to sauces. It's wonderful to add to sauces, to cook vegetables in, to make as a soup base. I did not add vegetables and stuff into it. Some people do, but if I do add vegetables into it, and also if I have vegetable peelings and stuff that I've thrown in the freezer and frozen, I might throw them in. But I only throw them in for the last couple of hours, because if they cook for 24 hours, the bones need to cook for a long time, but the vegetables do not do well from being overcooked like that. So oftentimes I'll use the broth and I'll put fresh vegetables and fresh meat in if I'm going to make a meat-based soup. So it's a great thing to do. You can also, because many people have been talking about needing sleep and having trouble getting to sleep. If you're feeling snackish towards bedtime, you don't want to do this like right before bedtime, but you want to give yourself an hour or so before your bedtime, but you're feeling like a snack, the bone broth can be a great way to have a lovely, really nutritious light snack, but it's not going to keep you awake with your body energy to digest it. So you can heat up the broth. If it's too strong, add a little water to it. You can do that by taste. And then you can chop up a little green onion, or you can maybe put in a slice of lemon or a slice of ginger if you like that, so slice the ginger and crush it and then put it in there, and that'll give it a little bit of flavor as well. Let's see, so ginger, there's one other thing that I like to put in it. It's gone out of my head now, but you can put, so onion, ginger, lemon and any kind of spices or herbs or something, any of that makes a nice light drink before dinner, before bed. And it warms your body and it resonates with that water energy, which is also really important in terms of getting the peaceful heart that we need for sleep. So that is my story about bone broth. I hope people will try it. And I think it's one of those things that it's nice to have. You can keep the bone broth for a couple of weeks in the refrigerator. If you're going to keep it longer than that, it's nice to just pour it into a smaller jar or container and freeze it in the freezer. Sometimes I'll freeze a bunch of ice cubes trays with the bone broth if I have special trays just for that. And that's another great way to keep it, because if you have a couple of ice cubes of bone broth, you can throw them into all sorts of stuff, and that's another great way to preserve that. So that's that. Does anybody have any questions? This is the time where we ask questions. Okay, Carol, can I let you unmute yourself? Or yeah, I can't unmute you, so you have to push down your space bar or do something.
Unmute.
There you are. Okay, now
Okay.
we can hear you.
How much vinegar do you put in the water?
I just go like this, you know, with it, but it's probably
Okay.
about
Like a splash?
somewhere between two tablespoons and a quarter of a cup. It's probably
Okay.
between 2 tablespoons and a quarter cup. It boils off,
Okay.
you know, as you burn it for a long time, it boils off, so you don't have a vinegary tasting soup at the end, because it boils off. It gives it a sort of a depth of flavor, though. All right,
And
Lenny's got
much
his
time?
hand up. Lenny. Oh, wait, you got more, Carol? What was it?
Yeah,
Do
do you
you
put
have
it
more
in the
question,
crock pot
Carol?
for 24 hours? Yes.
Yes.
Do you
I
put it in
started
the
on
crock
high.
pot for
I started
24
on high
hours?
until it's.
On what setting? High.
I started on high. I started on high till it's bubbling, you know, and then I flip it down to low. And I've heard of people cooking it even longer, but that's what I usually do. 24 hours.
Thank you. Okay. I have more, but let somebody else ask questions.
Well, no, if you've got more, you're on. So let's do that. And Lenny will
See.
take Lenny next.
Oh, gosh. Let's see. Okay. I've got the thyme, the vinegar, and I forgot what the other one is.
The salt, maybe. I put in about a
commercial. What about commercial bone broth? I see it in the stores now. What do you think of that?
I don't know how they cooked it. I don't know how they cooked it. That's the trouble with anything processed. You don't really know what the heck they did with it or what they used to start with. I mean, I know what condition my bones are in when I put them in the bone broth. I don't know what they're putting in. You know, that's the whole problem, you know, but it takes more time to do it, you know. So I usually have a few things of broth, you know, the processed broth, because sometimes I don't have any in the refrigerator and I want to use it. And it's a good flavoring. And I figure I got a small chicken bone broth and a small beef bone broth on my shelf right now that I use. So, from time to time, but I prefer to use the real stuff. Okay, I'm going to go to Lenny and then I'll come back to you, Fran, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so Carol, I'm going to put you on mute. Wait a second, Lenny. There we go. Okay, Lenny, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to know what type of vinegar do you use?
I use generally, I use what I have in hand, and generally that's Bragg's apple cider vinegar, because I like that, but you could use.
What do you think about white balsamic?
I don't know that one.
Okay.
What kind of vinegar?
Excuse me?
No, tell me the name of the vinegar again.
White balsamic.
A white balsamic, white balsamic might give it a really nice flavor. I don't think it really matters as long as it's acidic. It's the acid that pulls it out, but the white balsamic might give it a really nice flavor.
And one more thing, do you prefer beef bones or chicken bones?
I use both. I use both pretty much interchangeably. Depends what I have on hand. I do pork bones too. In
What do you
fact,
think
huh?
What do you think is more powerful? Or it doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters. I think it's more about, for me, it's more about flavor. And I think that that flavor is always our best guide, because flavor is our body speaking to us.
Okay.
And the body never lies, but the mind is tricky. So when we're saying, oh, I read that this was better for me than that, but it tastes bad. I mean, that's how we got into this place in our world where people think if it tastes bad, it's healthy. That was like, never in the human history has that ever been true. Never in human history. And now that's, oh, it tastes bad, it must be good for me.
That was
That's
our grandmother's
nuts.
fault.
Your grandmother told you to, eat it, it's good for you. Yeah, that's
Right.
true. But I think the health food put that on steroids. The health food craze, a lot of this stuff wasn't so good. So did you have any more questions, Lenny?
Yeah, just one thing. I always tell my clients that if you don't like it, don't eat it. There's always something else.
Exactly.
You should enjoy food. You have to enjoy what you're eating.
Yeah, and that was one of the benefits of that program, the nutrition program that we went to. And I think there's a lot of other programs that teach that way. I really like the registered dietitians that subscribe to Ellen Satter's eating confidence model. And I just listened to a really good talk that they gave about working with people with diabetes and helping them to find the foods they like and be able to navigate instead of eating, like a lot of times they don't even know what food, one woman, this registered dietitian that was teaching the class, she said she had somebody in one of her classes where she was working with the diabetics, and they thought chicken was a carb. So the doctor says, don't eat any carbs. And if that's the only information they get, then, then they really, they have no idea why, they're not measuring their blood sugar. So she does this, it was a brilliant program actually that she did with and it was about enjoying food. And I think that that's so important, that we really do have to enjoy what we eat. And that's how we celebrate the lives that gave us that food. So do you have any more, Lenny?
No, let someone else go.
Okay, I just took the life of a little mosquito. Anybody else have a question or comment? Carol, I think you had your hand up. I gotta you gotta unmute yourself, Fran, so we can hear you. There you go. No, not yet. There you go.
Hi.
All right, Fran, I think we can hear you now.
Okay, well, in the olden days and even today, our ancestors, some of my ancient rituals with food that I know about is fish bones.
Yes, they're also very good.
Fish eyes. There's a fish soup, and it sometimes has clams in it and mussels. What about seafood soups?
Yes, seafood is also really good. In fact, fish bones are really good. And when I have lobster up here in Maine in the summer, I'll take all the lobster bones, all the shells. I have to make sure that the little rubber bands don't get mixed in with them, because the rubber bands do not taste good after they've boiled. for any length of time. But if, but I put in all of the lobster, the shells and all the parts that people have left behind. And it makes a wonderful broth. And then I'll make, often make a clam chowder or something out of that. But again, it's the same thing. I boil it for 24 hours. I put in vinegar. I put in, that would probably be really good with white balsamic. I have to remember that this summer when I do that. You know, salt and balsamic vinegar of some sort, and it leaches all the calcium out, all the minerals get leached out and into the broth, and works really well. So
Thank you.
I didn't talk about that fishbone broth, but that's another one, and the eyes and stuff, all of that. All of it's good. Well, not all of it's good, but a good bit of it. I try to take out the brains of the lobsters as well, because, or not, I don't even know if it's the brains. There's a gland in the head that is toxic. So I'll pull that out. And that's the only thing sometimes with, you know, you need to know what's safe to eat and what's not safe to eat. And we've sort of lost some of that, but you can never go wrong with the bones, the animal bones. With the fish, you do need to know what parts of the fish to pull out before you boil up all the bones. If you're boiling up organs, fish organs and stuff, that's a little trickier, but the bones are good. All right. I guess I didn't kill that mosquito. All right. Any other questions or anything? Comments, questions? So, well,
I was gonna say, Susan, usually when I make it, I'll put the carrots and onions and stuff in and then pulse them at the end, you know, to disintegrate them and keep them in the broth. But that's me.
I like to do that too, but I don't want to add them. I don't want them to cook for 24 hours. Like 3 hours is plenty for vegetables, I think.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'll add them at the end. And sometimes they can give a real bitter flavor to the food, to the broth if they boil too long. So that I usually
I think
only
carrots
add.
can, yeah.
I only add my stuff at the vegetable stuff at the end.
Okay.
if I'm gonna keep it in the broth. And but when I'm making a soup, a lot of times I'll use the broth and cook the vegetables in the broth and then pulse them up, and that usually gives, like broccoli soup, a really good flavor, or any of those soups that you puree to make a cream of broccoli, cream of, you know, any of those. It really makes them taste really good and a lot more nutrition. You know, that's you know, and it's even healing. I forgot to add that bone broth is a medicine, because chicken soup is definitely something we've all known. You know, it's called Jewish penicillin in some circles. So it's, you know, again, full of nutrition, full of good stuff. So, any other questions, comments? Well, I hope I see you all next week for yogurt. We'll be talking about yogurt. So, oh, bye.